Every time you search for something online, you're tapping into an invisible architecture, a system for organizing knowledge that's been in the works for literally thousands of years. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. So let's dive into the history of how we got here.
I mean, that's the question, isn't it? It's the challenge of our time. You need to find one specific thing, so you type a few words into a search bar and bam, you get an answer. But what's happening behind that simple click? Well, it's all part of a massive, super complex system built to solve a very, very old problem.
That's right, 5,000 years. This feeling of being overwhelmed by information overload, it's nothing new. The minute we started writing things down, we immediately ran into the problem of, okay, now how do we find any of this again? This isn't just a modern digital problem, it's a fundamentally human one.
Okay, so our story starts way back in the ancient world. The main technology for information was the papyrus scroll. A brilliant invention, for sure. But just imagine trying to find one specific sentence in a 30-foot-long document with no pages, no chapters, no nothing. It would have been an absolute nightmare. So pretty quickly, people came up with some clever solutions. The Sumerians kept beautifully organized records on clay tablets. Fast forward a bit, and you have Greek scholars at the legendary Library of Alexandria starting to use alphabetization, a huge leap. By the 1st century, the Romans were using title slips and even creating early versions of chapter summaries for massive works like Pliny the Elder's Natural History.
And what's so fascinating here is that the original index wasn't a list of words in the back of a book. Nope, it was literally a tag. A little slip of parchment hanging off the end of a scroll so you could see what it was without having to unroll the whole thing. It's basically the ancient ancestor of the metadata you see in your computer's file list today. A simple tool, but totally revolutionary for managing a library.
And this, right here, this is the core challenge they faced. Everything was copied by hand by scribes, so every single copy was unique. It had different handwriting, different spacing, different line breaks. You couldn't make an index that said, go to page 42, because in the next guy's copy, that same passage might be on page 50 or 38. It just wasn't possible.
And then, boom, around 1450, everything changes. The printing press arrives. For the very first time in history, you could make hundreds, even thousands, of perfectly identical copies of a book. So, that whole page number problem, solved. But it created a brand new problem, a total explosion of information on a scale no one had ever seen before.
The hero of this new era, you could say, was a guy named Conrad Gessner. He saw this absolute flood of printed books coming out and decided to take on the monumental task of cataloging it all. His work, the Bibliotheca Universalis, was this groundbreaking attempt to list everything in print. It's why people call him the father of bibliography.
Now, alongside these big catalogs, another critical tool pops up, the abstract. As the first scientific journals started appearing, scholars were just drowning in paper. The abstract was born out of pure necessity. It was a short, punchy summary that let a busy researcher figure out if a 20-page article was actually worth their time without having to read the whole darn thing.
All right, let's jump forward to the 19th century, because things really start to accelerate. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing, and it's fueling a massive increase in magazines, journals, and scientific papers. Indexing couldn't just be a side hustle for scholars anymore. It had to become a real profession, with its own systems and standards.
And this period gave us some truly foundational innovations. You get Poole's Index to Periodical Literature, which was the first serious attempt to get a handle on all those journals. Then you see these highly specialized databases emerge, like Index Medicus for doctors and Chemical Abstracts for chemists. But maybe the biggest game changer of all was one for the libraries themselves.
The idea from Melville Dewey was just pure genius in its simplicity. See, before him, most libraries just shelved books in the order they bought them, so a new book on astronomy might end up next to a cookbook. Dewey's idea was so simple. Why don't we put all the astronomy books together? This concept of relative location is the very same logic we use to organize files and folders on our computers, and it completely revolutionized libraries forever.
So now we're in the mid-20th century. The computer age is dawning, and the next big leap forward is triggered not just by technology, but by geopolitics. The Cold War heats up, and suddenly, scientific information becomes a critical, strategic, national resource. When the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, it sent an absolute shockwave through the American system. People were panicked. There was this widespread belief that the Soviets were winning the space race because they were just plain better at organizing and accessing their own scientific research. All of a sudden, a fire hose of funding was turned on for information science to make sure the West didn't fall behind.
This new pressure, combined with the raw power of early computers, led to some really radical new ideas. You had Mortimer Taub's uniterm indexing, which let you do more flexible searches, kind of like the and or we use today. Hans-Peter Lund at IBM developed automated keyword in-context indexing, which could rapidly scan titles for important words. But the most revolutionary idea, that came from a man named Eugene Garfield.
Garfield's insight was just profound. He realized that every time a scientist cites another scientist's paper, they're creating an intellectual link. It's an expert saying, hey, this other work is relevant. He figured if you could map all those connections, you could create this incredible web of knowledge that wasn't dependent on language. You could literally trace an idea forward and backward through time.
Okay, and from this point on, the pace just goes vertical. The development of online databases puts the world's libraries at our fingertips, and now, of course, artificial intelligence is changing the game all over again.
The story of the company Dialog is basically the story of the online search industry itself. It started as a small project at Lockheed, led by Roger Summit. In 1967, a test with NASA showed it could slash research time by 99%. I mean, can you imagine? By 1972, it was the world's first commercial online search service. And by 1988, its value was undeniable. It sold for over $350 million.
This really just highlights the enormous gap between then and now. Research went from this slow, physical process, walking through library stacks, flipping through card catalogs, manually skimming journals, to an instantaneous digital query that taps into a global brain.
And we've never needed these tools more. The current estimate is that the total volume of all printed knowledge is now doubling every 8 years. Just think about that. The information explosion isn't a metaphor anymore, it is a straight-up mathematical reality.
And this is what makes modern search feel like magic. We have moved way beyond simple keyword matching. Today's AI understands meaning, or what we call semantics. It knows that feline means cat and that a cucumber is a vegetable. This allows it to find what you're actually looking for, even if your search terms aren't in the result at all.
Which brings us to a final, and I think really important question for today. For centuries, humans have been the ones curating knowledge, but as we increasingly hand over the job of indexing, abstracting, and now even summarizing to AI, we have to ask, who's watching the machines? Who is programming the logic and ensuring the fairness of the very systems that are now starting to define our reality?
If you found this look at history helpful, inspiring, or even just entertaining, please do us a favor and share it, give it a like, and of course, subscribe for more. We'll see you on the next upload. Thank you.